Congress is set to vote this week on a bipartisan agreement to suspend the debt ceiling and avert a potential government default.
As a banking crisis looms and economic optimism falters, a dire warning emerges, debunking hopes of Fed interventions and predicting a tumultuous path marked by stagflation and banking sector vulnerability. Investors are urged to brace for a potential market collapse. In the face of a looming banking crisis and economic challenges, the speaker expresses concern about the market's optimism. They argue that weak economic data and potential Federal Reserve rate cuts may not be sufficient to curb inflation. The speaker predicts a scenario of stagflation, anticipating a weaker economy coupled with heightened inflation. The banking sector's vulnerability is highlighted, with fears of widespread failures and the government's potential response through inflation, putting depositors at risk. The Federal Reserve's lack of criticism towards government deficit spending is also criticized, adding to the uncertainties in the financial landscape. Before we start our videos, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon for our upcoming uploads. So without further ado, let's dive in. In the midst of an impending banking crisis, concerns loom large as investors grapple with the fragility of financial institutions. The stock market, while witnessing a surge attributed partially to the buzz around artificial intelligence, AI, grapples with the reality of overhyped valuations. The overarching narrative revolves around weakening economic indicators, particularly in the manufacturing sector. Investors, interpreting these signals, are led to believe that the Federal Reserve, Fed, has reached the end of its tightening cycle, if not embarking on a path towards rate cuts. Amidst this scenario, a prevailing sentiment takes hold that even if the Fed's attempts to raise rates prove insufficient in curbing inflation, an economic downturn might serve as a de facto solution. The rationale behind this line of thinking lies in the expectation that a significant contraction, especially in the labor market, would naturally lead to a reduction in the inflation rate, bringing it down to 2% or lower. This outlook is embraced by markets, and the anticipation of future rate cuts becomes a driving force behind the bullish market trend. However, a dissenting voice emerges, challenging the prevailing optimism. The contrarian perspective dismisses the notion that an economic downturn will act as a panacea for inflation, asserting that it might, in fact, propel inflation to new heights. This contrarian outlook stems from the anticipation of more significant budget deficits, triggering an augmented wave of money printing and a resurgence of quantitative easing. Contrary to the prevailing optimism, a dissenting viewpoint challenges the belief that an economic downturn will remedy inflationary concerns. The contrarian perspective firmly rejects the idea that a recession would act as a cure, positing instead that it could potentially exacerbate inflationary pressures. This contrarian stance is rooted in the expectation of substantial budget deficits, setting the stage for an intensified bout of money printing and a revival of quantitative easing. The anticipation is that these fiscal measures, far from mitigating inflation, may propel it to unprecedented levels. This contrarian outlook casts a shadow on the market's enthusiasm, highlighting the risks of underestimating the potential inflationary consequences and urging a more cautious interpretation of the economic landscape. The contrarian viewpoint warns of an impending stagflationary environment, a weakened economy coupled with heightened inflationary pressures. This forecast, contrary to market enthusiasm, paints a bleak picture, especially for growth-oriented tech stocks that seem to be overlooked by many investors. A retrospective analysis underscores the root cause of the impending economic challenges: 2 decades of excesses fostered by artificially low interest rates, excessive debt, unchecked consumption, and speculative activities have, over time, eroded the foundational structure of the economy. The impending economic correction, necessary for recovery, is further complicated by government interventions seeking to mitigate the severity of the downturn. The script delves into the historical context, drawing parallels with past economic crises and the role of recessions in correcting malinvestments. However, A departure from historical norms is noted, as recent attempts by governments to counteract corrections have only served to prolong the pain, turning the correction into a more protracted and agonizing process. The script shifts focus to recent bank failures, emphasizing the precarious position of financial institutions. Mortgage refinancing and commercial mortgages are highlighted as areas where banks face significant challenges, with collateral values plummeting and negative equity becoming a pervasive concern. The vulnerability of banks, laden with long-term low-yielding debt, now grappling with the consequences of their past decisions. The domino effect is evident as banks, grappling with insolvency, lose deposits due to an exodus of customers seeking safer alternatives like money markets. The inherent dilemma surfaces. The government's capacity to bail out banks is contingent on inflation-inducing money creation, which in turn jeopardizes the value of deposits. The script underscores the lose-lose situation for depositors, emphasizing the inevitability of substantial losses amidst the unfolding banking crisis. As the script nears its conclusion, attention turns to the role of the Federal Reserve and its chairman, Jay Powell. The script criticizes Powell's reluctance to scrutinize government deficit spending, a departure from the independence the Fed is meant to exhibit. The script invokes the legacy of Paul Volcker, a staunch critic of deficit spending during the 1970s, emphasizing the current chairman's failure to play a similar role. In conclusion, the speaker posits a contrarian perspective on the prevailing optimism in the market, challenging the belief that an economic downturn will alleviate inflationary pressures. Anticipating larger budget deficits, the speaker foresees an escalation of money printing and a resurgence of quantitative easing, suggesting that far from quelling inflation, these measures may exacerbate it. The speaker expresses skepticism about the market's excitement over a potential recession, asserting that it could, in fact, contribute to a heightened inflationary environment. In their view, the widening budget deficits and the resulting increase in the government's net interest costs will prompt the Federal Reserve to intensify money printing. Ultimately, the speaker warns against underestimating the risks and advocates for a more cautious interpretation of the economic landscape given the potential challenges ahead. So don't forget to subscribe our channel and hit the bell icon for our upcoming uploads. Until the next time, goodbye.